All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Josh McDaniels. It's June 23rd, 2022. We're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield University. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get us started is why wine?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Certainly, it's always fun to come down into Willamette and, Linfield, we're talking about some good memories here, but didn't go to college here, actually looked at it, but, it's just such a beautiful area, and it's always like a nice kind of, it reminds me of Walla Walla, but in a different way, and so it's a nice complimentary place to visit, but also a nice kind of, differentiation that gives me something else. So it's always nice to be here. What was the question?
Why wine?
Yeah, why wine in general, man? It's a big, broad question. I got into wine when I was very young, when I was 15, 16 years old, much to my mom's strong disliking. I started my own winery when I was in high school. So I was kind of actually in a backwards way too. I was much more of an entrepreneur than, had any interest at wine, as you can imagine, being that young. Didn't really know a lot about the product, but outside of knowing that my mom didn't want me to drink alcohol, but really just was trying to find a way to make money. And my dad was an entrepreneur. And so I thought, maybe I could put some wine together and try to sell it and figure something out. And, fast forward a few years, it turned out I actually fell in love with the process, and from farming to winemaking to sales and the business side, and inevitably found out I loved the product as well. So it was a totally backwards way of getting into the wine industry, but something that, had its own proliferations.
So what on earth made you think wine rather than like a lemonade stand or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was the mystery of not being able to consume the product. But also I think like Drew, who are my friend and boss and business partner now, we always joke that we kind of have like business ADD. And I think that the wine industry, it's, and when you boil it down, it's farming and manufacturing and accounting and sales and marketing, and there's so many different aspects of it that I think, you never get bored, and you're always, your mind is constantly engaged in a different way and constantly challenged in ways that, you haven't, you didn't do yesterday. So it's a pretty unique and dynamic industry that way.
So let's back up a bit. You mentioned kind of growing up. Tell us where you grew up and kind of your path after school.
Yeah, so I grew up in Walla Walla. Great place to grow up, especially, you certainly, as a kid, you take it for granted, right? Beautiful little farming community. I think the county now is like 62,000 people. And it's, as a kid, you don't really understand what you have. And so, certainly once I got older, the plan was to, go to business school and go live in a big city. And the wine industry, changed that for me. But growing up in Walla Walla was, now that I'm older, I understand how much value was there. And it was a great town. My dad worked at the cannery when I was a kid, worked the night shift at the cannery. When we were young, and I remember, middle of the night, my three sisters and I would cram into my mom's white Suburban and huddle under the heat register and take my dad lunch at 2 a.m. And he ended up getting hurt at the cannery, and that's how he started his first business in Walla Walla. And this accident ended up being one of the best things that happened to him, because it kind of changed his mind and thought process about, I probably should start doing something different. And he was a big inspiration, I think, to me starting my own businesses.
So tell me about after high school.
Yeah, so high school, Walla Walla High School, go Blue Devils. After that, I had big plans, but I had a business at the same time that was actually doing pretty well. And the winery had grown to 2,000 cases, and it changed plans pretty rapidly. And so I made the hard decision to stay in Walla Walla and attended the enology and viticulture program there, which is through the Walla Walla Community College. And at the time it was hard because I always enjoyed academics, and kind of felt like settling a little bit to go to a community college, even though the program had and still does has a great reputation. But yeah, it was challenging, and so I did that. And as more good fortune would have it, the Lehman Brothers collapse and the financial crisis came kind of at the end of 2008, and I graduated from that program in 2009, and that business and a lot of my family's businesses were really struggling, and made another hard decision to not continue college and try to pull everything out of the edge of bankruptcy. So it was a really challenging time, but in hindsight, it was easily, certainly a better education than I could have paid for going to business school or continuing on in enology and viticulture. So I did, do a lot of extension work through Washington State and Davis, and I'm actually looking at right now going back to school. So, yeah.
Interesting. I'm gonna come back to the back to school part. That's interesting. Tell me about, you mentioned it's kind of interesting. We haven't talked to anyone who had a wine business as they graduated high school before to consider. Yeah. How do you grow a wine business when you're not 21 yet, and how did it function, and when did it become something you thought you started taking seriously?
Yeah, I took it seriously at the beginning. I remember having, sitting in Spanish class or something in high school and writing out, pro formas on the back of a legal pad, I guess, and it was engaging and interesting to me from that perspective, and it took off right away. I mean, it was 2005, kind of the height of a lot of growth in Walla Walla, and the first year we did 110 or 20 cases of wine, which isn't very much, but sold it out in a couple weeks, and the next year we did 400 or 500 cases and sold it out in a couple months, and then we grew a little over 1,000 cases and did really well, and then 2,000 cases for a couple years, and it was great, and it was hard to run it. And originally, my name couldn't be on the liquor license, so that my parents helped me out with that. Somehow, I talked a few people into investing with me, and that's kind of how I got the capital to grow. Which also, in hindsight, how the hell do you invest into a winery with a 16, 17-year-old kid? I don't know. I don't know if that speaks more about me or about them, but. Yeah, big challenge, but certainly kind of fun too. And I think I enjoyed that. It felt rebellious in a lot of ways, having an alcohol company when you're that young, and like I said, the mystery of it was really engaging. But I also remember, the week that I turned 21, I was on the road for sales trips, and I slept on my cousin's couch for a week and just stayed in Seattle and pounded pavement and trying to sell wine, and it was learning from experience in that regard. And when it's your own money and now other people's money too, you had to be successful. And so you had to farm really well. You had to make great wine. You had to manage things on the behind the scenes really well. And so it was just an incredible experience, incredibly challenging, incredibly uncomfortable, especially once the financial crisis came. And I learned just a ton from it. It was a great experience.
So tell me about the educational process then for you at Walla Walla. You've already been doing this a little time. What did you not know yet? What did you have to learn, and what did that program kind of add to your skills?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot, it was a lot of science classes, but obviously you had core classes. I signed up for extra stuff too. I took, a couple more years of Spanish and whatnot, and there's some small business management and just like, English and math and whatnot. So it was, continuing ed from those perspectives, but, also it was a lot of science, and found out I loved soil sciences. Had an incredible professor for those 2 years. And then there was plant sciences, and it was just a lot of just refinement and like background knowledge about what you were doing. But I think you got a broader understanding of what you were trying to accomplish too, or what you were accomplishing. You actually understood how you were accomplishing it. So, chemistry or biology obviously played big roles in that too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you mentioned after school, obviously rough financial time for everyone, hitting close to home. So what did you have to do at that point, and what was the kind of the next step for you?
Yeah, so growing up, the Figgins family that founded Leonetti, they were, Chris was kind of like my second dad in a lot of ways, and I started working. That's partly how I got into wine, is I started working for them when I was young, and when I got out of, I worked for them full time while I was in school too, and then made my wine at night, and then in 2009 when I got out, I went as much hours as possible trying to make money to pay for what I was doing, and yeah, it was they were hugely helpful in that regard. So I learned as much as possible from them. They actually gave me money to go to school too, and gave me, I remember Chris gave me some Cabernet plants to plant, and I bought their old barrels, and I used their vineyard crew on the weekends. Their vineyard crew would come manage the farm that my wife and I had. So it was just a crazy, all-encompassing time of my life that you just worked your ass off, and yeah, it was challenging, and I'm glad I'm not in that situation now, but I'm really glad I went through it.
So what was the brand called that you were working with at that point, and at what point did you take on the next step?
Yeah, so it's called Sweet Valley, which was named after the Walla Walla sweet onion, which was, as a 15-year-old, it was a great name, but the kind of the misconceptions about sweet wine turned out to be a hard marketing hurdle to get over. And then I had another line called Righteous Wines, which was kind of trying to break down barriers for people that were my age to try to get them into wine, which fast forward 15 years is what we're still all talking about. And yeah, so we grew them really well, and Righteous especially took off and did pretty well. And my wife and I had it was, at the same time, the financial crisis kind of allowed some opportunities that maybe I wouldn't have had if it hadn't have happened. There was a piece of property that was up for sale that the owner needed to get out of underneath of, and my wife and I talked him into carrying a contract, which nowadays probably wouldn't happen. But because of that, we built up a lot of equity, and then ended up being able to make a lot of wine from that vineyard, and then also sold it a few years ago and made good money for ourselves too. So there were pros and cons to that time, but it was really good to get out of. Yeah.
So you mentioned Drew Bledsoe earlier as your kind of longtime partner and business partner in this project. So at what point does he enter the picture?
Yeah, Drew and I met while I was at Leonetti, and I remember the first time we met, he obviously big name, as a Walla Walla kid, Drew Bledsoe was, I always say, the mythical, godlike figure that every young boy aspired to be, and kind of lived your dreams out vicariously through him. And I like to kind of remind him that he's actually a little too old, that I don't remember a lot of his playing days, which is pretty funny. But we met at Leonetti. Chris Figgins was the original winemaker for Doubleback, and so I worked on the Doubleback wines from the beginning, because we kind of managed Doubleback, or Leonetti obviously, Figgins, their new project, and then Doubleback, and then eventually Toil, Oregon, which was Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. And so Drew and I met just casually, kind of in the winery a few times, and then over the years we struck up a really great relationship, and things happened, and slowly started to make a plan where I took over Doubleback from Chris, which ended up being a great option for me. So I ended my winery in 2015, and the year before that kind of took over. I was 26 when I took over Doubleback.
What was the process like for you to go from a place where you've been making kind of all your own decisions for a very long time to now having this kind of somebody else's project that you're working for?
Yeah, it was good. It was Drew and I had gotten to know each other for a long time. I think we both had a lot of the same mindsets. Drew, you don't get to the NFL without being competitive, and then retiring, you can't get rid of that. And then me being young, I had a chip on my shoulder with something to prove, and very competitive in that regard. And so we connected in that way. And, Drew, I got to watch that interaction between Drew and Chris, where Chris had a lot of autonomy. Mm-hmm. And I remember asking Drew, I kind of interviewed him because you don't want to get into a big project with a lot of eyeballs on you and fail. And so I took that process pretty seriously, and I asked him, is this a vanity project like you see so many athletes or celebrities take on, or is this a real business where you have to make great wine? And yeah, he answered it that way, and I also had seen that he was hands-on, but he understood that he didn't know what he was doing, and that was a big thing to admit for someone like that, and something that I appreciated a lot. So it was certainly nerve-wracking because it's a lot of money and a big player in Washington wine, but I felt very comfortable having come from Leonetti and learning, having gone through all the mistakes and failures at my own companies in the past. It was a good process to go through. The first year or so was a lot of learning, but you got that under your belt, and I felt really good about it.
So before I move on with that, I'm curious, you mentioned obviously mistakes and failures, a lot of challenges in that business like that. Tell me, what were some of the big kind of learning experiences for you in the early years of your wine career?
Yeah, so first things first is you can't sell, even for someone like Drew who had a big name, you can't sell shitty wine, and so you have to do everything from the ground up the right way. You can't have the best sales team in the world and make mediocre juice and sell it for $100 a bottle. You just can't do it, or you can't do it for very long. And so you have to find great ground. You have to farm it really well. You have to plant it really well before you farm it. You got to make really great wine in every regard. Mm-hmm. Then you have to have great packaging, and we talk about it a lot in our company now is people ask you, what do you do well? And we say everything. We do everything really well. We try to do every small detail really well. And that was really important from the get-go to understand, like from my Sweet Valley days, that there were times where I cut corners and had to learn the hard way what that result was. And it wasn't great. And, and when you're 18 years old, you have your money and other people's money, and the financial downturn is enormous, and just the pressure of that, and you make the wrong decision to cut a corner, maybe in winemaking or the packaging or whatever it was. That wasn't a small price to pay, and I see it happen all the time now. Even through 2020, you saw a lot of people cutting corners and making mistakes, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, and you always have to have your eye on the long term in this business. And for us, we've always said that if the wine's not great, it's not going in the bottle. And if it's not a good long-term decision, then we're not going to do it. And the wildfires of 2020 down here in Willamette were a great example of that. We made the decision to try to make all that wine, and it just was, maybe we could have made it all right, $25, $35 bottles of Pinot Noir, but they weren't good. They weren't good enough $85 bottles of wine, and so we sold it all off as bulk, and that was really hard to see and do, but it was an easy decision because we knew it was the right long-term one. Mm-hmm. So things like that that I learned back then certainly have translated into how we operate now.
So tell me about your sort of winemaking style or philosophy at that time, and again, kind of going from autonomous decision making to working with other people. Did it change significantly as you took over at Doubleback?
I don't think so. I think, obviously Leonetti played a huge part in my style. I was that was, born and bred there and ingrained into my mind and the ways to do that. I think maybe I've never been afraid to be different, and I've never just wanted to make kind of like what's cool. I've never wanted to just do that, and so I've always gravitated towards producers like in Barolo, and where there's like too often today, people are so afraid of tannin, and specifically like in Cabernet, and probably even in Pinot Noir. People want soft, pleasing wines, and they're just always have been really boring to me. And I think that sometimes we've flirted that line in ways that some people don't like, but so far, we have a great mailing list of a lot of people that do like it, and we're not trying to make wine that pleases the crowds, and I don't think I've ever done that, but maybe I've just gotten better at it. But one thing we've stayed committed to is we've said that we always want to make wines that we truly enjoy, and hopefully other people do. And I think that too often I've seen people trying to make wines that Jeb Dunnick or Robert Parker, XYZ critic enjoys. And I don't think that's staying true to yourself or something that really is intriguing or intellectually, bringing you much happiness in doing it that direction. So we've always tried to stay true to making wines that we like and hope that other people like them. So far, it's been, we've had enough people agree with us.
So you mentioned the first year there, a big learning experience for you. What was unique about the experience at Doubleback and the kind of the expectations there? And take us through the first couple of years working there for yourself as you're kind of growing into the work there.
Yeah, so it was, I would say it was figuratively big shoes to fill because Chris is kind of a smaller guy, but had a big name. So it was I was nervous stepping into the shoes for sure, but I was excited at the same time. What did I learn that first year? Importance of having a great team, importance of being organized and ready, but also like there were small things like I've picked too early. I don't think I've ever picked too late. Mm-hmm. Small things like that. And 2015. Was a curveball with the second vintage with my name on the bottle, and it was the hottest vintage on record. And big curveball, and especially with Cabernet and the estate sites that we have in Walla Walla that we farmed, challenging, very challenging. Easy to extract way too much tannin and make these wines that were just super out of balance. And you had to approach things differently. Mm-hmm. So learned a lot that year, and we were just talking about it with last year, 2021 being almost as hot as 2015. We were super comfortable with that, and I have the same team of guys that were with me back then that are with me still, and so we understand how to approach those situations. So I don't think, one thing that I appreciated about Drew is that he didn't want to make 100%, 200% new American oak and ultra ripe Cabernets. He didn't want to make Camus Special Select. He wanted to make something that was, number one, true to where we both grew up, because he grew up in Walla Walla too, and also something that was elegant and complex. And one thing that he talks about a lot is, rather than your first glass of wine being the best, he wants your last glass of wine in that bottle to be the best sip that you have. And I think that speaks a lot to wines that age really well, and wines that pair with food really well, and not just wines that maybe you first fall in love with like when you're young into wine, that are like obvious wines, wines that start to open up and unfold and have layers and complexities to them. And I think that's unfortunately maybe the rarity these days, but maybe the pendulum's swinging back to that. So I appreciated that a lot, and it was something that I obviously bought into and was excited to continue on.
I'm curious about how as your role evolved. Give me an idea of sort of vineyard time, winery time. How did you kind of break it down, and what were you still learning along the way, or what were you kind of looking to kind of add to your skill set? Yeah,
great question. The first thing that I saw at Doubleback when I took over was, we had 2 estate vineyards at the time, and growing up at Leonetti, we had 4 or 5 maybe 6 now, and that was a big piece of the puzzle to me. And when you have these extreme vintages like 15 and 4 years prior to that, we had the coldest vintage on record in 2011. And so when you have these, just dynamically different growing seasons, you need to have vineyard sites that are also dynamically different. And so we had McQueen Vineyard, which is a little higher elevation, up on top of a ridge line of fractured basalt. It's very windy and just incredibly hard to farm, but it's all tannin and acid. Then we had Bob Healy at the time, which was kind of the heart of the hill, that was riper and pretty fruit and a little bit more lush. And so then I went down the hill into the Rocks District. We found a piece of property there. It took a few years, and found pieces and people that we'd like to work with, and kind of weaseled my way into a piece of property there. So that is like the exact opposite of McQueen Vineyard. It's the Rocks District has its own set of characteristics, but it's lush and plush tannin, but also like not as much acid, and just rounds things out from the hillside perfectly. I mean, they balance together really well. And now we have an estate at the winery, which sees these enormous temperature swings. It's a cooler site, but it's actually like sees our highest highs and our lowest lows, though. So lots of acid and like darkly flavored and just enormously textured wines. And right now I'm under contract on another piece of property that's in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. And so it's just like developing this portfolio where, rather than I've never believed that you should have to do a lot in the cellar. You should have to do a lot in the farms, and that was enormously important, because in a hot year like 2015 or 2021, then you can go to those cooler and later ripening sites and make those a bigger part of the blend, and then vice versa. In really cold years, you can go to the warmer sites and utilize those more. So we can balance out vintage variation a little bit, but still maintain a sense of identity and a sense of place within in a soul, farming our own places and having our own land.
Obviously, you mentioned that's a lot of different kinds of vineyards, a lot of different kinds of viticulture, I would assume, needed for those. How much is sort of coming from you and from the Doubleback team, and how much is coming from the people who farm those sites?
Yeah, I direct it all, and it's all like philosophically directed by me. And then, it goes back to one of the original comments, is just the importance of having great people around you, and people you can trust, and people that you can understand and interpret what they're saying into actuality. And I'm learning that again down here in Willamette. We bought a piece of property we bought last year, and just trying to find another set of people that I really trust and enjoy. But yeah, I kind of set the standard, and then the pragmatic side of it is to go out and execute that, and our team does a really good job of it. But I still get out and get through vineyards as often as possible. We used to joke that we'd be out in whether it's March or May or June, and you'd never see a winemaker out in the vineyard until 2 weeks before harvest. So there's so much farming and flavor development, so much further, earlier in the growing season than that. Your things are already done by then, and so I've always been a big believer in just time spent in vineyards. And in 2019. We started our own farming company, and this was a huge shift for us. We finally had gotten enough acreage that it made sense, and we've always been sustainably certified, but which to us means financial sustainability, obvious a lot of environmental things that we do, which we can talk about. But the big thing that, especially then, that I think is catching on maybe now, was the people aspect. And so we started out, we had our own crew, and we made a commitment to make them, one of the highest paid, if not the highest, in the Northwest. They have full health insurance, they have full retirement benefits, and so many farms, lay people off after 8 or 9 months of the growing season, and we keep them employed year-round. So that big, kind of shift for us starting in 2019 was really cool to watch, and we did it because it was the right thing to do. But the unintended consequences and benefits we couldn't have measured or expected. And I remember in harvest of 2019, October 9th, there was a fall frost event in Walla Walla, and wiped out a lot of vineyards, and we were in pretty good shape. And so our crew went and helped one of our neighbors pick their fruit, and one of our crew members they finished up, and I think it was our crew leader Pedro, he came out and to our vineyard manager, and he's like, boss, and I'm like, yeah, Pedro. He's like, this vineyard looks like shit. Our vineyards will never look like this. And it was just little instances like that started to click, like, wow, like, because we took care of them, they're taking probably even better care of us. And because of that, they're staying with us. And so it's the same group of people that are attending every vine in our vineyard. And so they understand it better than, I ever could have, because they're there every day and they're not leaving. And so they understand, where does the soil series change in this block, or where does maybe the irrigation fault in this block, and they're just, the unintended benefits of that decision were enormous, and something that has been really impactful on our company. And that culture has flowed all the way up to the top through our production and sales team, and it's been a really cool impact.
Tell me about the sort of the farming style and its evolution in the time, if it's evolved at all. Yeah,
well, right now we're all live, certified sustainable through Live, which is down here in the Willamette Valley, and that's been huge for us. We're organic down here in Willamette, and we do a lot of organic things. I've never liked some of the certifications, and I don't like to have to pay people to tell me what we already know. That's always annoying. But it's like I said, sustainability had those three things to us. And, the first one, financial sustainability. I remember my first college professor, Dr. Stan Clark, told me, Josh, it doesn't matter if you like to make wine if you can't afford to do it, which I learned the hard way. But if we want to make environmental differences, or if we want to make HR differences in people's lives, we have to make money. That has to come from somewhere. And so we've always committed to that. That's been a big piece of the pie. And then, the environmental side of things, we bought Mimi Castile's place down here in Willamette, and she's been incredible. And I've always enjoyed soil sciences and biodiversity and understanding how to make things better. But she's really ignited another spark recently in going back down that rabbit hole, which has been really fun, and gotten really big into better understanding regenerative farming practices. And particularly, we were in Napa last spring with at Harlan, of all places, and fully prepared to hate Harlan, but good Lord, it's beautiful. And they were, in Napa, and ecology is enormous, and understanding water usage, and they're trying to dryland farm in Napa. And I remember coming away from that night, talking with our team, if they can do it in Napa, why can't we try to do it in Walla Walla? And so, trying to understand, regenerative farming practices within that realm much more deeply, and trying to push things towards that end of the spectrum, because if we can get there, it's enormously impactful on all three of those things within sustainability. Obviously financial cost savings, and then obviously the environmental impact of not pulling water out of the ground and spreading that out across a piece of property. So it's just that style, I think, is probably stayed the same, but enormously evolved, and just one of our core values in our business is being open-minded, and that's been really key to being able to make those pivots, and not being afraid to say I was wrong, and how do I get better.
So before we get to the purchase here in the Willamette Valley, kind of before you decided to kind of get into a whole different realm of the wine industry, tell me about how the business had progressed, and sort of where you kind of felt the stature of Doubleback was.
Yeah, so Doubleback is right around 4,500, 5,000 cases of production, and it's all allocated and sold to a mailing list and private to go out to the winery. And we didn't want to screw that up at all. We really enjoyed that size and the quality of the wines, and also always feeling like, even though we were making some of the best Cabernet, on the West Coast, that we always felt like with that size, we can continue to get better. And that was really important to us. At the same time, we just launched, 10 years after Doubleback had launched, we launched Bledsoe Family Winery. And that was really, twofold. One, we felt like because of that, we could make Doubleback better also, because we had more access to fruit. And then also, Drew and I both grew up in Walla Walla and understand that not everyone can afford a $115 bottle of Cabernet, and we can't always get people into the winery. And that's kind of lame to us, right? I mean, his parents were school teachers, and my dad worked at the cannery. We didn't grow up with money, and so it was important to us to have something that was more approachable, more affordable, and a little bit easier to understand and digest. And that went really well. And Willamette kind of came up in so many different odd ways. My wife and I during college loved to come down to Willamette because it was wine country, but we didn't know anyone. And so it was kind of like an escape for us, where we could go to be in a tasting room and not know anyone, and found out, like, holy shit, these wines are also incredible, and the valley is beautiful. So that was kind of the first bug for us. And then Drew's wife Mara, she grew up in Lake Oswego, so there was kind of a pretty close hometown connection to that. Drew also, lives in Bend, and I think, in their household, they drink more Willamette Valley Pinot Noir than anything else. So that was important. And then for me on the production side, we launched Bledsoe McDaniels, which is the Willamette project, in 2019. In 2011, I was making Pinot Noir with the Figgins family, who had launched their Toil, Oregon project. I think their first vintage we released was 2012, but we started in 2011. So I had a long history of making Pinot down here, and got to learn a lot about it through that regard. But at a high level, it's so, we've always felt like they're so obviously different. I mean, hot, dry Eastern Washington, kind of cooler and wet, the Willamette Valley. But they're so, you scratch under the surface a little bit, and they're so similar. All the lava flows that formed Walla Walla and the Columbia Valley also mostly formed the Willamette Valley. The Missoula Floods, the two most foundational and transformational pieces of the puzzle were the exact same. The Missoula Floods broke through, carved out the Columbia Valley, and then backed up into Walla Walla, continued down the Columbia River, and then backed up into the Willamette Valley too. So those two things were enormously similar. We were making Syrah in the Walla Walla Valley, and it's, highlights terroir really well. It's like a product of the exact place where it was grown. What is Pinot Noir? It's the exact same thing. So there was obvious differences, but very, very unique and interesting similarities that I think nobody ever talked about, and we wanted to kind of highlight that. So launched the project, and in 2019, and it's gone. We released we actually made the 2017s under a different label, and sold it under a different label to see kind of how it went and how the wines were, and it went really well. And so 2018 was our first vintage, and it's gone really well. And I also think, Pinot shows everything really well, and this has been one of the most interesting things to me is, you have to be very precise and understanding of the site and farming and winemaking too. And having to do that, I think it's also made me a better Cabernet winemaker. So like back to unintended benefits, right? I didn't think that would happen, but it's been, a lot of people say, how can you be a great Cabernet producer and then think you can be a great Pinot producer? And I think, those the collaboration of understanding those differences, I think, helps make you maybe a little bit better, more well-rounded.
What are the main differences when it comes to production of the two stuff, Cabernet and Pinot Noir?
Yeah, well, the obvious ones, Cabernet, we bring it in, we beat it up. I mean, we just, kick its ass in the winery. I mean, a lot of oxygen. depending on the blocks, some heavy extraction, depends on the block, some really light extraction. So those are the big differences. Because Pinot, we come in generally very gentle and very hands off, and not any oxygen, and it's just those are the two obvious factors. But we do some whole cluster fermentation with Pinot Noir, which I really love, and don't do any on Cabernet, obviously. But yeah, those are the two high level obvious differences that people see. But at the end of the day, it's still very similar. And if you can just compartmentalize and see the big picture for each project, then you can understand the pieces to the sum, the later sum, and develop those individually.
So when the time came that you decided to kind of go into Pinot Noir in the valley, was the plan all along to eventually purchase land here, or did that just sort of come about?
If we always have said if we were going to get serious about a project, then yeah, we want to be estate driven, just like Doubleback. It's important to us to be connected to the land. It's important to us to have people that we trust managing it, and then and just philosophically, it's more interesting, I think, to us, like as consumers, when that's the case. Mm-hmm. It's just like the vertically integrated model is just like. I mean, as a consumer, I know that I like that more because it ties people to that actual piece of ground. And like I remember Jean-Louis Chave, one of my favorite winemakers. He's like, what is quality? And like in this day and age, like what is quality? Like if Burberry can replicate thousands and thousands of the exact same, scarf and sell it for $350, like is that quality, or is quality something that's non-replicable? And I think that piece of property part is non-replicable. Like nobody else in the world has that piece of ground and growing that exact same way that you are, and I think that's really important to highlight and to share and to illustrate to the consumer.
So how did the actual piece of property that you did end up buying come about?
I always keep my ears open and just talking to people, even if I'm not interested in buying it. But having known that we would be eventually interested, and quite frankly, we were probably like 2 years premature of like really being ready. But we were looking at a few things and kind of like not impressed with what we were finding. And somebody just mentioned this piece of property that might be for sale, and maybe we should call her. And so we gave Mimi a call, and I'd heard everything about Mimi too, and which is so funny how polarizing the wine industry can be and the misconceptions around that. But fully prepared for like Mimi to not like us, and just absolutely fell in love with her, and the philosophy of what she was doing, and just the property was just like gorgeous. I mean, I was just there, an hour ago, and just beautiful, and the way that she had done it too, so much reminded me of what I would have loved to have done when I had started my own winery, and so I think it really struck a chord, probably emotionally too. I remember Drew and I were on the road together after that, and I said it's actually really hard to keep your business hat on in this instance, because there's a lot of those emotional kind of tugs on that property, and it just kind of checked off all the boxes for us, and eventually worked out a deal with Mimi, and it worked out really well. So she's a fantastic person that's doing some really cool things, and wish her nothing but the best.
So with the property, as you started to get to know it, what do you kind of like about it now, and what do you see coming down the road? Yeah,
well, the first thing that I loved about it is, in winemaking, I've always tried to, the funny and stupid analogy that I've always used is like, if you're Bob Ross on TV and you're trying to paint this masterpiece, you need a color palette, right, to do it. And so we've always thought about wine in that regard. Hopefully we paint something better than a Bob Ross painting. But, you need different colors. And so that property to me had, different clones, had different soil types, had different aspects in so many ways, had different row orientations, and had different angles to the sun. There was just so much there in that one property from which you could make completely different wines. And so you can make completely different wines on that property and then bring it all into the cellar and then blend it into something that works. There's a ton of potential there, or not blend it into something that works. Keep them all individually separate and highlight things that way. So that was, at the high level, that was, extremely intriguing to us. And we also liked, there's a house on the property, and we liked the idea of, we've always thought we were going to try to replicate Doubleback in the Willamette Valley. And so small, by appointment, one group at a time, and just really get to know our customers and make great wine and that house and the property was set up perfectly for that. So plus there was room to grow and maybe room to plant some blocks that were more exciting than what was there, and so there was potential there too, and that was a big piece. So, but yeah, overall it's a beautiful piece of property. I was there today, and it's clear out, blue skies, thank God, and looking at Mount Hood, and I'm pretty sure Adams, and just a beautiful valley. It's really cool. So, and then take that onto the philosophy that Mimi had established there, and us trying to continue that, and understanding we will never fully be able to replace Mimi, but trying to take what she had established and build on it and do it in our way too. So, just an awesome opportunity.
So we talk about, we kind of brought up 2020 a bit earlier. I'm curious about your kind of experiences during 2020, dealing with a pandemic and harvest and all of that. And obviously Walla Walla a little bit different than most people we talked to in the Valley who were very affected by smoke that year. But tell me about kind of getting through 2020 and the adjustments you had to make and how things have gone the last couple of years.
Yeah, and importantly to note that Walla Walla, like 40% of the vineyards are in Oregon, so I want to make sure that's known, which I always, and a lot of people hate me for this, but I always hate getting hung up on the state border thing. I focus on the area, and that's what's important to me. But for this sense, I think it's important to notate. But yeah, 2020 was obviously crazy from the get-go. In Walla Walla, I remember actually we had historic flooding in January of 2020, and then we went into March. Obviously, COVID lockdowns were insane and just apocalyptic and hard to understand reality, and that it was real, and and trying to support your team and the human side of business, and also still understanding that Mother Nature's continuing. We have to farm and make sure the wines are okay, and so continuing that and finding ways and innovating in what we're doing and finding ways to do it in the appropriate way. And then, the wildfires that happened, and I think, I know for sure, the wildfires, the smoke taint issue is easily the most frustrating thing I've ever gone through as a winemaker. There's like no rhyme or reason to it. It's extremely hard to understand from an air quality index level, and the ability for it to taste great up front and then maybe 5-10 years later in the bottle for it to develop is scary. And also just the fact that you go through other issues in wine, and there's so much research and literature on the issue that you can actually learn from it, and there was nothing, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the US that has virtually no scientific background on it, and so this is kind of just mind-boggling from that perspective. But also, we had a beautiful vintage. It was a great vintage, and you get all the way until, like in Willamette, probably like all the way until like 2, maybe 3 weeks to picking time. You do all that work, and then 9 days of smoke ruins it. Just unbelievable, the timing of it and the frustration around it. And so that was just a crazy thing to go through, and then going through the same thing in Walla Walla, but not quite as bad. And so we ended up making some really great wines in 2020 in Walla Walla. I had to declassify a couple lots, but in Willamette we declassified the entire vintage, and just super frustrating. And I know some people made some great wines, and I'm super happy, maybe jealous about that, but I think it was certainly the right thing for us to sell that juice off and do something else with it. But what a hard year! What a hard year.
Coming out of it from both the kind of the pandemic side and the wildfire side, what were the kind of lessons learned for you? And if you have to deal with something similar again, what do you feel more prepared?
Yeah, certainly how to, leadership lessons were big. How to lead a team through something like that was enormously, challenging, and a really fast growth curve. But also, I think there were so many business situations that were similar to, it's a pandemic, but the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. There were, in a lot of operating ways, they were similar, and financial stresses stress everything. And at the same time, it was, almost embarrassing too how well we did. When you see other people, particularly the hospitality industry, struggling, so greatly, and then our business is killing it. That was weird to deal with, I think, mentally. But we raised some money for different various organizations and tried to filter it out that way, and make sure that we're playing our part to giving back to helping share that a little bit. But yeah, the human aspect, I think, was the biggest part. And 2020, it wasn't just the pandemic. It was political issues and humanity issues, and things that were taken to huge levels that weren't small issues. They were major ones, and none of it was easy. And a lot of it still isn't fixed, and is still going on today. So it's just understanding people are human too, and people make mistakes, and what we always try to do is focus on the big picture, and understand that you also got to keep sharpening the sword and sharpening the blade, and give people time to recuperate a little bit. And yeah, it was a stressful year, but our team did really well. So it was kind of cool, I think, in that regard, to see people be successful in the midst of chaos and sadness and whatnot.
So tell me about looking ahead a little bit now. You've got obviously a kind of the established brand, the newer brand, and the even newer Willamette Valley project. So tell me about what comes next for you, or for Doubleback and for Bledsoe family, and now the Willamette Valley. What are you looking ahead to, and what's kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, we're really focused on what we're doing. We really like what we're doing. We really like where we're at, but trying to get better at it. I think that's the main take home there for us is we don't want to get out over our skis. We don't want to grow just for the sake of growth. We want to make sure that we continue to make better wine and not get complacent or go the opposite direction. So we're just really focused on doing what we're doing and trying to get better at it, and building a company that nobody wants to ever leave. And yeah, it's just right now we're doing a lot of planting in our estate vineyards, so developing those more and more, and continuing to just fill in some gaps, I think, that we have. Like I talked about with the estate sites, is just this last vineyard that we're under contract on is kind of like one last piece of the puzzle in making Doubleback a great wine in my mind. And hopefully in the Willamette Valley we continue down that same path. I don't think it's something we're looking for actively, but if something comes up, then we're certainly excited about that and trying to continue to make better wine.
And what about for yourself personally, as you look ahead?
Oh man, my wife just had a baby, so
that's right. Congratulations.
Thanks. Focused on a lot on my family right now, and making sure everything. Especially the last couple of years, your family. The older you get, the more I think I've understood how important that is, and how you can't get it back, and just spending a lot of time with them, and trying to be happy in that regard, and be a good example for my kids, and yeah, it's I think that's where my head's at there. I'll get emotional if I keep talking about it.
I'm curious, since we don't have a lot of Walla Walla perspective in the archive. We have some, but not a ton, although we do have Gary Figgins and Chris Figgins. Tell me about, you mentioned Walla Walla kind of small, obviously has boomed as a wine area. Tell me about watching its development and what it kind of looks like now, and maybe look ahead to the future for Walla Walla.
Yeah, so it was big, my hometown, love living there, beautiful area. Like I said, as a kid, I wanted to leave, and now I don't know if I ever will, outside of, maybe just traveling. And yeah, I love living there. It's a great place to raise kids, and we have, great food scene there, James Beard chefs, and the hospitality industry is getting better and better. And so just a beautiful, awesome place to live. Chris and Gary Figgins were huge in my life, kind of the founding fathers of really Washington wine on the qualitative level. It was the 1982 Cabernet was named top Cabernet in America, and put things on the map. And the way Gary did build that winery was incredible, and I think I actually wrote a paper on him in high school, which is super funny. But he worked at the cannery actually with my dad, and that's kind of how we first kind of knew each other. And just a true American, dream story kind of thing. But Walla Walla, I think, 20 years ago was not like half of it, what it is now. The food scene's come a long way, like I said, and hospitality is on that way. And then, there's been some good outside investment. But one thing that I like about Walla Walla that I think that's different than like Napa or even Willamette to an extent, being so close to Portland, is that it is a true destination. So if you're coming to Walla Walla, you're coming for wine. And that's different, I think, certainly in Napa, where you can day trip out of the Bay Area and go up and hit a few wineries and have dinner and head back home in the same day. And you can do that here out of Portland too really well. But in Walla Walla, it's really hard to do that. So I think, because of that, I think maybe some of those higher, not higher, but bigger wine companies have been a little bit slower to come in, because of that, you're not seeing, 40,000 people through a tasting room every year. So that's a little bit more challenging, but it is starting to happen because the reputation has grown so much that, you saw the Jackson family just purchased a piece of property, and they're going to do a high-end wine project in Walla Walla. And the Valdemar family, the oldest winemaking family in Spain, built 3 or 4 years ago now and opened a winery. So there's some really good investment, and the coolest thing that I've seen is that people are doing it the right way. The Jackson family, they're actually making their wine at Doubleback, and so we've gotten to know them, and kind of like Mimi, I was fully, but in reverse, I was fully prepared to hate the Jacksons. It's the big corporate company coming in and they're going to ruin everything. And it couldn't have been more different, opposite of that. They were just asking questions and what can they do to help, and what are the best things that, how can they do this and how can they do that. And they just came in with a great attitude, and they're doing things at a high level, and just I think are really bought into the success of the valley too, and buy-in of that high tide rises all ships kind of things, rather than come in and we're Jackson, we're going to do it our way and fuck all the rest of you. So it's just been cool to see the continuation of good people coming to Walla Walla, which that can change quickly, but if we can help foster that, I think it's a good thing. We've always had that approach, don't badmouth people coming in, let's see if we can help them and get to know them and point them in the right direction. But Walla Walla's got a really bright future ahead of it, and I'm certainly excited to see it.
And what about for the Oregon, we'll use Oregon liberally here, wine industry as you look ahead, including kind of the Walla Walla, the Gorge, obviously the AVAs that span the border there. What have you seen as part of the industry, and what comes next for Oregon?
Oh, man. I mean, yeah, Oregon's got such a great reputation from Willamette Valley to Walla Walla. The Rocks District, which is part of Walla Walla, was named the most distinctive terroir in America, from Wine Spectator. That's a huge statement. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. I think certainly a lot more growth and investment and growth of existing brands and, global recognition of the Northwest. And that's how we view it, as the Northwest pulling together and making this big name for itself. And, with global warming, there's a lot of people understanding that maybe it's too hot to grow in Napa and a lot of California. And, we're certainly a lot more poised to accept some of that than other places. So there's just, I think, the sky's the limit for where we're focused in Willamette and in Walla Walla. And, Oregon as a state is just, there's so much to offer. I mean, the Northwest has great, a beautiful place to live. There's the taxes aren't as bad as California, and we grow everything, from vegetables to fruit, and we also have great salmon. I was driving down the Columbia River early this morning, and I got it's Copper River salmon, but we got some Columbia River salmon that's coming soon too. And so the Northwest we've got great Cabernet and great Pinot Noir and great Chardonnay and great Riesling, and I've had some pretty good Chenin Blanc. There's sparkling wines now, so Northwest is an incredible place to live, and I think people are starting to see that, and I think that there's just a ton of good growth, I think, because I think the leadership understands how to try to point people in the right direction and control the growth in the right way.
I'm interested to hear your answer to this question, because we've never had anybody who kind of had a wine brand already at the age we're talking about here. But if someone were coming out of college interested in joining the Oregon wine industry, what would your advice or words of wisdom to them be? Have already started a couple of years early.
Yeah, I would just say be humble and don't be afraid to take a lower end job that you're not going to come out and be a CEO of a company and enjoy that, because I think if you start at the bottom and work your way up, you get a lot more respect for it, but you also get a much better understanding of what you're doing, and that'll just help you in the long run. And I think be patient, work hard, and be a good person. Don't burn a bridge. The wine industry is really small, and people talk, and I can't tell you how many phone calls I've gotten from people for job references, and it's they're a great person or not, and my reputation or yours is what you have, and just be a good person and be humble and work hard.
All right. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today?
No, I thought it was great. Yeah, good stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And I'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it.